So I'm a psychiatrist and I work in the early intervention service in psychosis in Peterborough, which is the other half of our county team. And so I work a lot with people with serious mental illness, which I think is my sort of main qualification to give this talk. The other main qualification is availability. I'm here. Okay. So, before I start, I'd like to thank a few people because I've got into this world through this role, and I really wanted to make sure that I was getting some advice and input from people who have a lot more experience working with these difficulties. So just to credit Jess O'Brien, who's a student disability officer, and Helen Duncan and John Harding of the DRC, who've been very kind in giving me some of their time to help prepare this talk. So, I want to just be clear about who this talk is for. I'm guessing that a lot of you are from a sort of HR sort of management background, and of course, that's very reasonable given what the talk was titled as. But I also wanted to use the opportunity to do perhaps a bit of advocacy because there is information about policy and procedure available to you. And this talk is a little bit more about, hopefully, perspective than knowledge. Okay? What it isn't going to be is a sort of detailed discussion of different kinds of unseen disability, and which of course begs the question of what on earth is going to be about. So what I'm going to do is actually try and just help with a bit of perspective from my line of work to see if that might help you supporting people who you manage or your colleagues, or at least understanding your friends, colleagues who do struggle with unseen disabilities. So it might be helpful just to list out the sort of things that I'm going to be covering, but in no particular detail. So the things that fall under this umbrella, if there are things that I've missed out, please point them out to me. There's the neurodiversity spectrum, which includes the autistic spectrum disorders, ADHD, dyslexia and dyspraxia, sensory impairments, visual and auditory, because these may not necessarily be visible. Chronic physical illness, just put some examples over here: Crohn's disease, endometriosis, HIV, chronic fatigue. Neurological illnesses like multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, traumatic brain injury or chronic pain, and mental illnesses really of any kind. So I wanted to highlight some particular considerations when it comes to these conditions. And this is what I would be thinking of in clinic. That doesn't necessarily mean it's what you've got to be thinking of in your position, but this is just, I hope, will be helpful to give some sort of perspective. So the question is, what is the particular form of the condition in a person? As a general rule, one ought to assume that most health conditions are heterogeneous syndromes, i.e., they may have a particular name, but under that name, there may be very different kinds of illnesses that may vary tremendously. And even within something that may be relatively homogeneous, an individual's experience of that condition may vary a lot. So when we think about a condition like ADHD or ASD, most of the time we're working with a particular model of this is what we know about it. And it can be hard to bring to bear the fact that actually two people could have exactly the same condition and be nothing whatsoever alike. The second thing is, what is the severity? Because that makes a big difference to understanding the impact that it has on someone's life. And what is the stability? Now, this is something that's particularly useful to bear in mind for something like chronic fatigue syndrome, because you may have a condition which varies in its intensity or in its disability from time to time. And along with that is the next question: what is the predictability of the stability? Because you can plan around a condition that you know fluctuates, but fluctuates with some kind of predictability. For example, this is not, again, to be taken in mind with the fact that it's extremely variable. A condition like endometriosis can have a particular pattern in some people, so you know that some times are going to be worse than the others in a relatively predictable way. If you've got a condition that doesn't have very much predictability of the stability, that's even harder, because it can very much seem like you've got to live day as it comes, and it's very hard to plan into the future because you don't know how you're going to be feeling next week or 2 weeks later. And of course, we don't realize the value of that till it comes to a point where you can no longer just book things in your diary because you have space. Now, I wanted to highlight some particular challenges, frustrations, or indignities that people with unseen disabilities face. And again, for this, I'm particularly grateful to Jess, John, and Helen for their time and advice. One is having to repeatedly explain one's disability and, so to speak, be re-evaluated. So every person you speak to wants to know, okay, what exactly is it? And very often people find themselves in the position where I've been through numerous assessments and I have a very good understanding of my condition. My task here is now to convince you about what it is that I struggle with and for you to make your judgment about it. Not being believed, understood, or accepted. This is far too common. Repeated invasions of privacy. For example, being asked for detailed medical information that you would not normally disclose to a colleague or even an HR manager in that sort of detail, but nevertheless people feel like it's perfectly reasonable to ask you. Along with that also goes very often that people feel a liberty to discuss your condition amongst themselves. One of my most troubling experiences of this was a junior colleague with dyslexia who essentially had the entire, and this was in the NHS, who had her entire training rotation and all the consultants had in on the discussion about license. And she essentially had to do 2 independent investigations to be allowed to sit her exams. Being seen as an inconvenience or being unreasonable. The myth of being unfairly advantaged by adjustments, and this is something particularly for students who still find themselves struggling with supervisors or directors of studies who believe that them being given adjustments means that they are being advantaged. If you get more time in the exam, you're being advantaged over other people. And I want to, as we go on, explain really why that is so ridiculous. I think it's fairly obvious why it's ridiculous, but in a bit more detail. These questions, have you tried X, or you just need to do Y? And again, this belies a sort of lack of understanding of what it is the person is experiencing. Or you look fine, and the other side of you look fine is stigma. And this, of course, I'm very familiar more from the mental illness world, but it's not limited to the mental illness world. Okay. And dealing with disadvantage and loss. And I'll come to the loss bit in particular. The disadvantage, I think, is fairly evident. If you are dealing with particular limitations, you are often at a disadvantage with most of your peers. A disadvantage compared to most of your peers. Loss is something a bit more subtle, or not quite so subtle, and I'll discuss that a bit in a moment. Now, I want to highlight this particular aspect, and this is something that I should confess is borrowed from my course that I give medical students and trained psychiatrists. And that is something that we do in our roles, and we hope that most doctors and health professionals learn to do in their roles. I'm not suggesting this is something that you need to do. I don't think everybody needs to be able to do this, but I think everybody ought to have some sense about this. So, the task of modeling minds is simply the matter of understanding another mind. And of course, this is what we all do in our social interaction. It's an integral part of our social communication. But if we just boil it down to a specific context, in medicine, this is what we often teach as the empathy question. How would I feel if I was in this person's shoes? And the thing with this question is that it relies on 2 assumptions. One, that you have an accurate reading of what it is like to be in that person's shoes. And 2, your mind is sufficiently like their mind for you to make an accurate assessment of what it might be like for them. Right? We generally tend to understand other minds in terms of our own mind, and we often struggle when we encounter minds that are very, very different from ours. to get a sense of actually your experience of the world, your experience of yourself is so, so different from mine that I can try and bridge it, but actually on multiple points I simply cannot. I have no idea what it is like to experience the world as you do. When we train people in psychiatry, what we do is some actual explicit teaching around psychotherapy and learning to actually specifically model other minds. And of course, if you're in the course of any people-facing job, you will do this. It's a matter of the extent to which you do it and the extent to which you encounter minds that are very, very different from yours. In this particular context, I would just highlight the experiences of people with ASD, who have very different minds and very different experiences of themselves in the world from the neurotypical population, and face a tremendous challenge having to kind of translate and adapt to the neurotypical world. So the more accurate question is, how does this person feel in their shoes? And that's what you're trying to get a sense of. The first one may be knowable if you can satisfy those assumptions. The second one may not necessarily be knowable. You may never be able to form a sense of what it's like for someone in their shoes. The reason I highlight this is not because you need to do this, but you just need to be aware that this occurs, that there are some people for whom you're not going to get a sense of that, but critically, you don't need that to be able to help them or support them. But a failure to realize this essentially puts them in the position of having to somehow get you to understand them. And we often do have this odd condition of, if only I could understand what it is that you need, then I could help you. And the conditional there is for me to understand. And one has to think, okay, how much do you need to know to understand? How much time do I have to give you to understand for you to then be able to help me? When the reality is, I don't necessarily need to understand what it is like for you to help you. I just need to know what you need. And that's where I think this issue of being re-evaluated comes up. It's numerous people trying to understand what it is like for you, so they feel that, yes, now I can help you because I have understood. It doesn't matter that there are people who actually know your condition, with whom you've had multiple assessments, and who've told me what you need. I still need to understand for myself. And I may be belaboring this, but this is a repeated experience for many people with disabilities. Okay. There are also some rather difficult, pervasive, and to my mind, false societal beliefs which don't help the situation. One relates to this issue about modeling minds. So this, I sum up rather tongue-in-cheek, because of course I know my experience of my own mind and others' minds. It doesn't capture the totality of everyone's experience, but it covers it reasonably well, right? And that's a sort of the complete inverse of the trying to model a mind different from yours. It's the assumption that, look, with enough information, I can get what it's like. Of course, I may have to talk to you for hours to get enough information, but ultimately I will get there. The other is, and this is again a particular bugbear of mine in the mental illness world, with sufficient effort of will, we can ultimately think or make ourselves better or stronger. Right? This is a very, very pervasive belief across multiple cultures, that somehow through mental effort and sheer perseverance, we can overcome. There are a few corollaries to this, which is, one is that people who haven't got better or stronger have simply not tried hard enough. And then the follow-on from that is a lot of people will not even try to get better, and instead will try and play the system. And of course, this is a dominant and motivating belief in a lot of systems, the benefit system to name one. And the benefit system is actually, to a great extent, almost explicitly based upon this belief. Another one is, sorry, this is a bit of a repetition, so I'll just skip it. And the last one is, people's experiences can be understood as linear stories that make an overall or overarching sense, that there is a neat narrative arc that we can fit around this, that will fit into one of the stories that helps us understand the world great extent, often helps us feel a bit better about the pain of someone else's experience. And the fact is that a lot of us don't live linear stories. We can always tell linear stories about our lives, but our lives can be pretty random. It's one thing to impose a linear story, a neat account of your own life. It's extremely unfair to do that to somebody else. Because part of that linear story often is that, well, then we will do this, this, and this, and then this will be sorted. Whereas if you're living with a lifelong disability, no, you'll need to do this, this, and this. And as time goes on, you'll need to adjust that, and that, so that you can keep having the best quality of life possible for you. There isn't a neat conclusion necessarily here in a way that would make someone else feel better. Okay. I'm going to move on from there to another important idea, and this is the idea about functioning. Now, functioning is a widespread metric in most of our, at least Western societies to a great extent. It's a big part of our capitalist systems. That what you're looking at is how well do people function. If people are functioning well, that's fine. If people are functioning poorly, then that's a problem. And we need to do something to mitigate the problem. This is particularly close to home, again, for me, because in psychiatry, we put a lot of emphasis on functioning. So you can be suffering a fair bit, but one of the big markers for when things need attention is when your functioning starts to deteriorate, because that says, okay, things are really bad. And to my mind, what that, so this is what we look at in aha, here we need to do something. But to my mind, that is rather incomplete, because you can't think about functioning without thinking about the cost of functioning. This is just a schematic to illustrate an idea. It is not a real truth, but it's a helpful model to understand. So we can think about the fact that we've all got a certain amount of reserve, emotional, cognitive, physical, and it is from that reserve that we meet the cost of sustaining our functioning. Right? So, thinking about what are the elements of that cost, and this is just about what are the things that you need to do day to day. So, mental multitasking, planning in time, attention and concentration, decision making, emotional processing and interaction, cognitive control, processing and navigating the world. This is a rather big heading, but that's essentially all the physical movement and energy that needs to be expended in making your way around the world. But I've also emphasized processing because for different people, the amount of information processing that you have to do to navigate the world varies tremendously. And one example I would give here is people with ASD with sensory sensitivities, for whom the normal neurotypical world is actually profoundly overwhelming. Or for people with anxiety, for whom the actual navigating social spaces can be extremely demanding. So the point I emphasize here is about cost is that needs to be taken into account. When we do this question, when we make this remark, but you look fine, what that completely misses is how much effort are you expending in looking fine. It's the common thing that patients report when they go to all sorts of hospital clinics. They go there with months and months of suffering, and then someone says, but you look fine, without realizing it took me 4 hours to get dressed to come here. I had to put in that effort to look okay just so that I'd be presentable for this appointment. Just because I look fine now does in no way mean that I am fine. Okay, so now for the next bit, what I would like you all to do, and we might do a show of hands here, how many of you have at some point in your life felt completely overwhelmed by the demands of your life? Work, personal circumstances. Okay. I'm not going to pick the people who haven't put their hands up because you're freaks. I want you to just think back to that period or those periods of your life. And what I'm going to suggest is something that I think happens to a lot of people. Again, it's not universal, it's a model, it's not necessarily true. That What happens when we get overwhelmed is that the cost of functioning goes up. Right? And as the cost goes up, these are some things that a lot of us will experience. Feeling more worn out, feeling less efficient, feeling like you don't have as much patience or as much empathy as you normally would. In fact, there's quite a substantial reduction in that capacity, which often goes along with the heightened irritability. There are things that normally wouldn't bother me that seriously tick me off. A reduced capacity for the unexpected, right? Okay, I was fine because I knew this is what was going to happen today, and then this landed on my desk, and it completely threw everything. It takes longer to recover, so people find themselves going back at the end of a regular day feeling far more exhausted than they normally would, spending their evenings recovering from their days, spending their weekends recovering from their weeks, turning up on Monday morning feeling like I've had absolutely no rest, I'm still shattered. And life loses a lot of spontaneity, because spontaneity requires some reserve to play with. When somebody calls up in the evening and says, hey, do you want to go out? If you don't actually have the energy to muster, to go out, to be around people, to make conversation, then you can't really do those things. And increasingly what people find as this gets worse is that life becomes more and more regimented with less and less wiggle room. There's often an anticipatory weariness that comes in. Oh God, it's Monday, I'll have to go to work. Oh God, tomorrow's Monday morning, I can't see how I'm going to get through the day. And the shortening of time scales, which means that people start to look shorter and shorter into the future. So you can't think to a month. I can just about think to the end of this week. I can think about getting through tomorrow. But after that, I can't. Now, some of these things may be familiar to a lot of you from those points in your life. It is something that typically happens in most mental illnesses. It happens to a lot of people under stress. And what happens is that functioning doesn't really start to drop till you get to this point where there is no further reserve to tap into. It is taking everything that I have to do what I need to do. And here you're pretty much running on fumes. This is often the point that people start presenting saying that they're having problems, because a common internal trait of this experience is a continuous feeling that I'm just not trying hard enough. Right? I should just be putting in a bit more effort. What I should do is get a bit more sleep and make sure that I do X, Y, and Z so I can be up to the task. It's when things actually completely run out of steam that people's functioning starts to drop. The reason I emphasize this is just to highlight how poor a metric functioning on its own is. Right? And this is not just for people with disabilities of any kind, it's pretty much the same for anyone. So, when you get to this point where not only has your functioning dropped, your reserve or your capacity is completely dropped and it's taking this about all you can do, this is usually the sort of point that most people are off sick. Or in the mental health clinic, this is the point where people are seriously ill. But if we're looking just at this, you're always going to get people very late in the process. People have already gone past the point of where they could do the simple things that might help them. Okay, so I wanted to come back to this, and this is just a quick run through of these points. So what is the particular form of the condition in a person? Just bear in mind, when I took you through that, the reason I asked you to think about your own experiences was to sort of think about a time where I went through a state like this. I want to take you now to a point where actually I don't go through a state like this. I live in a state like this. So in that case, when you come to what is the particular form of the condition in a person, you're thinking about, okay, what are the additional costs that this person is constantly having to deal with in living with the condition they live with? What is the severity of those costs? And what is the stability? So if you know that it's something that you're going to have to endure every day, you can plan for it, you can budget your costs or your reserve accordingly. However, if it's very changeable, then you don't even have that ability to say, okay, I need to leave this much additional time to take care of this every day. I'll need to devote X amount of mental units to taking care of this, because that's going to change from day to day. Makes it even harder to plan. So, thinking about different conditions and different people, you could have any of these things affected either in a continuous, i.e. it's always the case, or in a variable way. So again, I'm not going to go into detail, but just to highlight some examples. So when you think about people with ADHD, maintaining attention and concentration is a big part of the challenge, but also these are all linked. So you need to maintain attention and concentration to actually mentally multitask and plan in time. Emotional processing and interaction, or processing and navigating the world, these are costs that people with ASD, for example, have to bear considerably more than most neurotypical people. So different people are going to incur different kind of costs. How do you manage the cost? So I highlighted this, I bring this up here again because this is what I mentioned happens when things have gone particularly bad and people aren't able to function. But you can't really live your life in a constant state of this. Mind you, there are people who have to, right? So it can't be that the way you live is essentially constantly on the path to here. Then you rein yourself in, or you take a break, recover a bit, and then you're back on this track. So what people have to do is think about alternatives and innovations that they can use. And these are things that either they found out through their own experience, or they found out with the help of specialists in whatever area of disability that they suffer with. You have to make various adjustments, accommodations, and aids. And even if you manage to do all those things, you may still have to live to some extent with the variability and the costs. And one thing what one commonly finds is that what people do is that they limit their lives. Right? So if to have the life that I want would incur too much cost, too much time that I don't have to spare. So what I do is I limit what I do. And within those limits, I can function pretty well. And that puts me at risk of people thinking that I'm doing okay. And what people don't realize is that I'm doing okay because I've had to limit my life so much. One of my most poignant examples of this is the lady I looked after for a while with bipolar disorder, who essentially had life limited to the point where she had 3 or 4 friends, she went to church, and she worked 11 hours a week. And within those bounds, she was okay. She couldn't go up to 12 hours a week. And she tried numerous times over the year, but she couldn't. Now that is actually a fairly narrow bound that you have to come to accept in your life. And people do have to make these adjustments and these sacrifices. It doesn't mean that they're okay in the snapshot that you see. It's because actually the picture doesn't have a very wide panorama, and that's something that they had to give up. And that's where a lot of the loss that I referred to comes in. Things that you've had to give up because their costs are no longer sustainable. The one thing I want to really emphasize is that no matter what you do, people seem to incur a huge time cost. Things take longer to do, things are more effortful to do. And this is something that comes up repeatedly across the board. Yes, I can do what I need to do, but it takes me longer. And the way that our systems are set up, if you've got to do things and it takes you an hour longer, there isn't very much room in most of our systems to account for the fact that you need an hour more to do this job, whether it's because of concentration, whether it's because of sensory difficulties. But the time cost is something that comes up over and over. Some things that people often notice from the outside is that people always seem to be running late. People are always getting their assignments or the projects that they need done just past the deadline, or asking for last-minute extensions, which always feels like, okay, this is you just being lazy, this is just you planning this badly, when often it's the fact that actually I budgeted all this extra time and I still overrun. Okay, so what do we do as managers and colleagues? So things that I'd emphasize are, just remember you're almost certainly one instance in what is a long history of the person having the experience of not being believed or taken seriously. And that comes to this point of repeatedly being reevaluated. When you think about the procedures that students have to go through here to have actually even their known disabilities recognized and accommodated, it can be pretty shocking. You could be someone who's been through a whole bunch of assessments, had your statements and your HCPs from school, they've all been transferred over, and then your department says, go to the DRC, and once you're registered with them, and they've signed you off, then we'll take this into account. The DRC then has a 6 or 8 week waiting list because there are a lot of people with known disabilities who are just waiting to be taken on so that somebody will take stuff seriously. And of course, each instance comes with the pressure of having to prove oneself and one's needs. And the person, as I said, has already often been through multiple formal assessments of their disabilities and their needs, and they know far more about their difficulties and their needs than you do. So, what I would say is that the question that we've got to ask is, what is my role here when it comes to helping or supporting this person? And to fulfill my role, do I need to ascertain the nature of this person's disability? Do I need to determine if their needs are genuine? Or do I need to determine if I can believe them? And the answer to all these questions is a very resounding no. You don't need to know any of these things to actually be able to help someone if that is your role. What you need is information, not understanding. It will be good if you have understanding, but it's not the role of the person you're helping or managing to provide you with the understanding. I haven't read so far, but quite understandably, as humans, we often do have a morbid curiosity about other people and their health. And you've got to be careful if, look, is that what you're indulging in? Are you asking somebody for information because you're curious, not because you need to know? And that's a little side note to remember, but I think the bigger things I would definitely emphasize in this, you don't need to do this to be able to help or support someone. So with that, if I just return to the challenges and frustrations, I'm hoping that I've just given you some sense of what all these things are about. And to just bear in mind that for most people these are repeated and ongoing occurrences. So I'm going to step back from that and just highlight the broader context. I'm not sure this is the sort of thing that we do very much, but I think we should. We have to remember that the broader context that we work in is a patriarchal system that's predominantly white, heteronormative, cisgendered, able, and capitalist. And we have a lot of these problems inherent within these systems. So they are, without a doubt, inherently misogynistic, they're racist, they're homophobic, transphobic, ableist. I don't know what the term for the problem with capitalism is, but I think you all probably know what I mean. But these are all inherent parts of the system, and they affect able-bodied and disabled people equally. But it's the intersectionality which I particularly emphasize. So if you have a disability, and you happen to be a woman, or you happen to be a person of color, or you happen to be somebody who identifies as LGBTIQA+, all those things intersect to give you more problems to deal with. When we think about difficulties, we often tend to take a very, very narrow perspective, and the majority of you in this room are women, and I'm sure most of you would have had some experiences where it has been impossible to tell people that this is just so blatantly misogynistic, because the system is set up that way. that's nearly done. So my concluding message is, if you take only one thing away from this talk, then you clearly haven't done anything. Okay? I will not take credit for that. That is an original joke by Simon Munnery, which I find a great closer for talks. So it's very important, since I do a bit of amateur stand-up, to credit jokes to who they belong to. So this is Simon Munnery, and I'd certainly emphasize that. So I'll stop now, and we'll have some time for questions. Thank you very much.